The Effects of Child Abuse and Neglect is brought to you by Texel, your credit union, with locations in Temple, Belton, and Killeen. Visit us at texel.org.
May the face of the Lord shine on you. May He shower His blessing on all that you do. May you never know anguish, sorrow, or strife. Dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of your life.
Howdy, I'm Sue Ellen Jackson from Aware Central Texas, and this is Effects of Child Abuse and Neglect. Did your mama call you stupid when you were growing up? Did your dad scream at you? Did your spouse control you and tell you you were incompetent, you couldn't balance a checkbook? Did your older brother tell you he never loved you and you were adopted? And if you have those kinds of childhood memories, you may want to sit with us for a while and listen to what we're talking about today. We're going to be looking at invisible scars, and we're talking about emotional abuse, what that is, and really how it affects children and how children take it into the rest of their life. We're going to be hearing from a couple of ladies that have suffered abuse, and they want you to know that you can move away from that. And if you are someone that was demeaned or undermined or treated badly as a child, you can move away from that. But it's going to take some work on your part. So stay with us and hear what we have to say and what some of our friends here have to say. I have with me Joy Childress, and Joy's a new friend, and I just want you to know I love you. I love your story.
Not so fond of my story, but I'm glad to tell it.
I love the fact that you're a person that has taken tragedy and turning it into something beautiful. And Joey's going to be sharing quite a story with us today, and I hope you'll stay for that. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, let's talk.
Okay.
You have suffered emotional abuse. You didn't suffer it as a child. You thought, like I did growing up, that everybody was good to everybody and that people were kind and good and nobody that would care about you would ever do anything bad to you. Mm-hmm. And your world was redefined. And you want to share that with us?
My world was drastically redefined just when I said I do.
Yeah.
My family was sort of what I kind of jokingly call them the Stepford family, because it was a typical stay-at-home mom. Dad was an engineer. They didn't argue in front of us. They weren't affectionate in front of us. We all had dinner together at the same time. But I fell in love with this beautiful blonde-haired, blue-eyed, on-fire for God man. We had 2 dates. And then he asked me to marry him, and off we were to Bible school. So my parents did not know him, and I didn't know him either.
Right. I
didn't know any background. He didn't know me either. So off we went to Oklahoma, and and we were married for 28 years, and I guess I want to start with the fact that I found out that he was a severely abused child. His father left him at age 9. His mother gave him up. He was in foster care. And it's a miracle to me that he even came to know Christ. He actually got out of all of that. He did drugs and he was in prison, and yes, all of these things you should find out before you marry someone. But the physical abuse started in my life with him the first month of our marriage, and I honestly thought that this is just something that I was going to have to go through because he was called to the ministry, And he was an evangelist, and he had led many people to the Lord. He led two people to the Lord on our first date. So
Thinking
I was
back
just,
on that, do you think that he was somehow mentally preparing you for that in some way?
I honestly think that it, you know, we talk about the cycle of abuse.
Right.
I honestly think it was a catapult in his life. It was just that I picture his life as like a salmon, the salmon run,
Against the stream.
Going against the stream.
Right.
He was doing everything in his power to try and break the cycle, and I honestly, I was the first person who truly showed him love.
Right.
His sister tried to protect him. He had a perverted idea of what love actually was because, obviously, I mean, his dad doesn't love him. His mother gave him up. I mean, how can you? I mean, I have no one, and so I came into his life, and I was the first person who showed him love, and really kind of, he was the first person who showed me affection. My dad was not a real affectionate person, and we all want affirmation. So, you know, and he was good looking.
Sure, when you're a young
And he
lady,
was on fire for God.
There you go.
So, you know, my recipe was very short.
Well, and you grew up like I did, believing that.
I still
People are
believe
good.
that to
I do
this
too.
day.
I really do. My
It's-
family hovers over me because they tell me I'm naive,
Mine-
but I still do that.
I have a whole army of friends that, you know, are like in my protectorate now, you know. And I know the questions to ask now, and I know what to see.
So he hit you.
He hit
Or
me.
pushed
He
you?
held guns to my head. He strangled me to where my blood vessel popped. These things I knew were not normal, but when you're in an abusive situation, number one, this man took himself from being a severely abused child all the way through, he got a physics degree. He was a 10th grade dropout. He got saved. At some point, which I found out a month before he died, and he committed suicide last year.
Let's take a break. Let's hear from someone that has experienced abuse, and let's hear about what they're doing to move away from that.
Did I suffer emotional abuse as a child? I think everything I went through was emotional. And being a child, I think like everything was so chaotic in my household. You know, I was the only girl, and I was right smack in the middle. I had 3 older brothers. I had 3 younger brothers. So it was like, it seemed like a different generation, you know, because we were a lot older and they're still a lot younger. Everybody was constantly screaming at me. I don't know why me, but everybody screamed at me. You know, I think a lot more of the emotional abuse that I dealt with was foster care, actually. The foster care system was horrible. And I hope and pray to this day that they've gotten better, but I don't think they have. When they took me out from my household from being sexually abused from my dad, and my mom couldn't provide my safety anymore, and they put me in the foster care system, it was horrible. You know, the things that I had to deal with. You know, my mom was pregnant with my youngest brother at the time, and I was in school, and somebody told me that my mom was in having emergency care for him and her. She may die and he may die. So I went home to the foster care mother and told her that I wanted to go see my mom at the hospital. And she says, you're not allowed to see your mother, and you're not allowed to talk to your mother if you're not, you know, I was actually allowed to talk to my mother, but she wouldn't allow me to. So, I mean, that was emotional for me. She just there was 2 foster kids and her daughter. And she really treated the foster children horrible. And That was the one foster home. I actually ran away from there. That was the first time I had ever ran away. You think all the stuff that I dealt with at home. I'd rather been home being emotionally, physically, sexually abused than I would have rather been in foster care, because at least I knew where I thought I was being loved, I knew I was loved by my mom. I knew my dad loved me his own sick way, but I'd rather been home. I could not deal with the emotional stuff. And then, they put me in another foster home. The lady, in her own sick way, had a sick religious thing going on in her own head. I don't know. Back then, I used to go to church all the time. Until then, I had stopped then. I refused to go back to church anymore, and I couldn't understand. I thought, that God was allowing this to happen to me. Until I got older, then I realized that it wasn't, But being in the foster care system had caused a lot of problems for me. Then I ended up in institutions, and then it just ended up from there. That was the emotional part for me. I had my first suicide attempt, actually, in one of my foster cares, so it was very hard trying to deal with that.
If you are watching this and you are thinking, I was emotionally abused, and something's beginning to awaken in you, an awareness or a knowing, don't shut that down. Give us a call. We will talk to you. We will help you find resources. We're just folks in the neighborhood. We're not fancy, but we do have heart, and we will listen with an open heart, and we don't pass judgment. It's not our place. Our number at Aware Central Texas is 254-939-7582. Let me give you that number one more time. It's 254-939-7582. Don't lose sight of the fact that whatever you've suffered, whatever invisible scars you're holding, you can move away from that, and there can be healing for you. Joy, your husband took his life after 28 years of marriage. Mm-hmm. And that hasn't been that long ago.
No, it's been 9 months yesterday.
So for 28 years, you stood by a man who you began to recognize was broken. And he was a man of God, and he was doing the very best he could with the skills and the relationship abilities that he had.
Which were poor.
Yeah. And yet he would physically beat you, strangle you, choke you, hurt you. What about the emotional? How would he maneuver you?
That was, well, because when you're abused physically, it's always your fault.
Right.
There's something that you said, or there's something that you did, or the way you looked, and you begin to do the eggshell walk.
Right. Why are you're going to make
and
me
so
do
then
this?
And it makes you turn inside and go, and obviously there's esteem issues then, I admired him so much for what he had gone through and what he had accomplished. He was a physicist and an engineer, brilliant man.
Right.
And so it couldn't be. I understood where he came from, so I excused it. But yes, I felt like, number one, it made me feel totally alone, even though I knew the Lord.
Right.
And yeah, I must be the reason why I bring out the bad parts in him.
Sure, that's part of that cycle.
And it wasn't an everyday thing. There was so much love too intertwined in it all. And then there's the whole, you want to keep their integrity intact, because like you said, you had the perfect, I had the perfect family growing up, and to admit that I have a broken one, or I'm myself now caught in this fury of abuse, and that it's probably it's got to be my fault. Mm-hmm. And very controlling. He would follow me sometimes to work, very paranoid about me. And then there were times that he would totally ignore me. And I'm a pretty fun-loving person. My parents named me Joy. Sometimes it's hard to live up to, but
It's kind of like you have a computer chip ingrained.
exactly.
Yeah, I'm
Turn
like
it
that
on.
too. Yeah.
And I remember sitting down with him one day when I kind of woke up, and this was just about a year and a half ago. I woke up and thought, I don't think people are supposed to treat each other this way that love each other. What is wrong with me?
Wow.
And that's when I started writing my poetry again and started singing, and, you know, I'd take myself to church if he wouldn't go. And I remember sitting down with him and going, why don't you like me like other people do?
Wow.
And there were he didn't answer that question. And another time I thought, okay, so he doesn't like me. I mean, so this is another part of the emotional abuse is I will withhold, you know, sex is different, but affection, love, you know, I heard you're a bleepa, 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 screaming, oh, you talk, emotions, yelling in my house. I'd never been around yelling growing up.
Right.
There would be like a switch that would turn on in him, and this other person would come out, and the words and the things that were said, and you would feel almost as though you were backed into a corner. And sometimes he would, and he did this with my boys as well, yell us into a corner to try and get us to admit something, and we would tell him lies just to get him to stop. And then we would feel guilty afterwards, and it is a cycle. Yeah. And I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell my family, and people that are in abusive situations don't tell for many reasons, and that is wrong because it hurts you. It doesn't help the person who is abusing get out of that abusive situation or find help. It hurts your children. Whatever they see or hear, they're going to take with them into their lives as well, and their relationships in the future as well. My kids are doing well.
I was about to ask you, how are your
I
boys
have a
doing?
27-year-old who's getting his PhD in Des Moines, Iowa in toxicology.
Wow.
He's a godly man, has a wonderful wife who's a counselor. Good to have a counselor in the family.
Yes.
She's awesome. And Andrew, my 21-year-old, has had the most difficulty, especially with Dad's suicide, because Wilson had rededicated his life to the Lord right before he died, and then he went and talked to Andrew, and who had been mad at God for quite a while, and Andrew and him were pretty close buds and could talk. He didn't harm Andrew like he did John and I. John and I have very similar personalities, and I think part of it might have been a little bit of jealousy, because everybody liked John, and John has a very outgoing personality, and people like me. I'm a lover, I'm a giver, you know, and part of that is maybe stemmed from some of the insecurities too, from living in 28 years of trauma. It's traumatizing, but it's traumatizing also to watch someone that you love
Go through that.
Absolutely.
Literally walk through torment.
Yes,
day
and he
after day.
couldn't handle it, and he couldn't handle what he was putting us through either.
Yeah. Let's take another break. Let's hear something from someone who has suffered abuse, and let's hear what they have to say about emotional abuse.
It's difficult to talk about. It's not easy to confess in public, hey, you know, I was abused as a child, whatever different kind of abuse it was. There's always a shame and a silence accompanying the shame. when you're an adult survivor of abuse, especially if you're a child. It's almost impossible to open up and tell anybody about it because you're embarrassed. And in my case, in my family, it was a norm. I thought that was everybody's family went through that. And so when I started to associate with other people and find out it's not normal, that's not how it's supposed to go, then I felt even more withdrawn. As a person who wanted to be honest, I would be more withdrawn, and then my outward front was just be funny, be talented, be successful, and then it won't matter that you were abused. You can just hide that behind this success facade. And once I came to know Christ Jesus, when I was about 23 years old, and when I came to know God, He began to start pushing certain things to the surface. And one of them was that the propensity for child abuse and domestic violence was going to continue in my family if I didn't deal with it. And so one of the first things I got to do after I had children and was born again was admit and confess that I was an adult survivor of child abuse and that there was going to be a propensity to abuse my own children if something wasn't done about it. And everybody was praying for me. I confessed to my pastor. I confessed to my prayer team. I confessed to all of my little prayer partners, and I told them all about it. I even told my mother-in-law. I told everybody. There's a possibility that I could become abusive if I don't do something now. Y'all pray for me. It wasn't only prayer that I needed. Prayer always works. But sometimes it's not a lack of prayer. Sometimes it's a lack of good programming. There was a bad program about child abuse, and it had started way, 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 way back. And this was a generational curse. My mother, her father before her, his mother before him, and that was going to continue on to my children if I didn't do something about it. The Word says if we confess, then He'll be faithful and just to forgive and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. So when I started confessing I have a problem with this, I need help with this, then the next thing I knew, my mother started confessing and getting help and getting forgiven. And her dad before her confessing, getting help, getting forgiven. So I guess what I want to say is that all things are possible with God. You can deal with it, you can overcome it, you can be healed from it, and you can help someone else be healed.
We want you to know that whatever you may have experienced as a child growing up, or what you may have experienced as a married person, Joy, you had a wonderful childhood and you walked into a situation that became a living nightmare for 28 years. So we don't know why these things happen, but we do know that you can move away from it and there can be healing. Here's our number again at Aware Central Texas, 254-939-7582. Joy, you have a gift. And we were talking earlier about those 28 years were not for nothing.
Mm-mm.
And that's going to be turned into something that's going to help other people. And you have a gift of poetry, and you have brought a poem for us to share.
And this is not a bedtime story for children, but this is a poem that actually came to me. I sometimes think about poetry, but this one came to me, boom, when I was administering a test at the university. So I wasn't expecting it, and my husband was still alive, and I was thinking about it was a self-pity party actually a little bit, but I was just thinking about what happened to him as a child and how it affected him as an adult.
Right.
And so it's called The Darkness. And this is also about the cycle of abuse, and it can be broken if you say something, and you can get out of it.
You can get out of it.
I was making plans to get out of it. There is a way. This is called The Darkness. The beginning, the end, the beginning again. The then, the now, the end again. A child born of parents poor, no choice whether or not this place was home. A babe once loved and cherished, nurtured and cared for, until the darkness came. Was there a specific date, a happenstance in time that changed it all? Whenever shadows fell, for whatever reason? This child was not to blame. How could a human being arms once held this life so gently and firm, use these same limbs with fists of rage inflicting pain, because the darkness came. Why? When? How? Whatever for? Use an innocent being from your loins to unleash inner demons, act out your fury. A tragedy, such shame. Do you know what you've done? Did you give bloody paws or just not care? Oh, there are scars upon the flesh, and inside too, deep, an eternal flame, when the damning, awful darkness came. The start, the finish, start again. The past, the present, what then? Does one ever recover from beastly acts of those who once were tame? Rest assured, gloomy, cloudy moods take precedence. This life is no fair game. Flesh wounds heal, inside, still raw. Your flesh and blood, your son, your heart and soul, you changeling with your wicked show of man, who gave this one your name. What happened to your old self, the one which taught to fish, play catch, stood tall? When did the ugly when did the ugly resurrection of this hatred make you not be the same? You spermed a human being, held it writhing, screaming, maybe even knowing. Perhaps this little creature could future foretell the agony, the pain. None should suffer in this way. Would been best had you and she been barren, than have torn to shreds the making of a good man. Would have been more humane. But the darkness came. The awful darkness came. The damning, painful darkness came. The darkness.
We're here to bring light. If you have been hurt, there is hope. And Joey's
Yes,
walking example of that.
Can't do it without the Lord.
Got to have that faith.
But there is hope.
There is always hope.
And you are not alone.
And you are not alone. So please, please consider picking up the phone or taking a step, even if it's a baby step, to moving away from your invisible scars. Joey, thank you so much for being here. And I want to thank y'all for staying with us. And once again, call us. It's Aware Central Texas, 254-939-7582. Thank you.
May the face of the Lord shine on you. May He shower His blessing on all that you do. May you never know anguish, sorrow, or strife. Dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of your life.
The Effects of Child Abuse and Neglect is brought to you by Texel, your credit union, with locations in Temple, Belton, and Killeen. Visit us at texel.org.